When the walls of your home start to scream, it doesn't sound like crackling wood, it sounds like your life ending in slow motion. That was the sound, the day everything I'd built, loved, and believed in turned to ash. It was a Wednesday in Asheville, North Carolina, so ordinary it felt protected. Sunlight pooled on the kitchen tile. The kettle began to murmur. I reached for the sugar, thinking about nothing at all, which I now understand was my last moment of peace. Then came the smell, acrid, chemical, wrong. I frowned, lowered the stove, and said out of habit, "Robert?" 3 years after my husband died, I still spoke to him sometimes as if grief had left a door cracked. I opened the living room door, and a wall of smoke punched the breath from my lungs. Flames had already climbed the curtains and were licking the ceiling like they'd been waiting decades for permission. For one stunned second, I watched the orange frenzy devour the couch where Ethan took his first steps and the photographs lining the mantel. Instinct yanked me back. I grabbed a towel and swung at the fire. It roared, loud and alive, laughing at me. I lunged for my phone on the counter and saw it sagging beside the stove, plastic softening in the heat. The smoke alarm was silent, the battery dead. I had meant to replace it last spring. We always think there will be time. I could barely see. Every inhale felt like swallowing glass. A thought flashed through my head with cruel clarity. So this is how it ends alone, foolish, surrounded by everything I love turning against me. Survival snapped me upright. I snatched my purse, my life reduced to a strap and a zipper, and staggered toward the back door. I missed the handle twice before bursting into the yard and collapsing to my knees on the cold grass, coughing until the world blurred. Behind me, windows burst outward, flinging sparks into the November air. "Grace!" Mrs. Jenkins from next door ran across her lawn in a flapping robe and wrapped an old quilt around my shoulders. "Oh, honey, your house?" "My house." I looked up. The roof groaned and dropped. The porch folded like paper. The place Robert and I painted yellow one summer. The rooms where we argued and made up and ate pancakes on Sundays, open-mouthed, screaming fire. The trucks arrived fast, but not fast enough. Firefighters moved with grim efficiency, their boots crunching on broken glass and wet charcoal. Hoses hissed, radios crackled. The world shrank to heat and sirens, and the taste of ash on my tongue. An hour later, the fire chief removed his helmet and came to me. Soot streaked his face, pity weighted his eyes. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, it's a total loss." Total loss, 2 neat words for a life. That night I lay on Mrs. Jenkins's couch while her grandkids whispered in the next room about why I smelled like smoke. I stared at the ceiling and felt blank. The crying would come later. First, there was only the heavy quiet of survival. Morning delivered paperwork and verdicts. The Red Cross handed me vouchers and soft voices. The insurance adjuster, a young man with a clipboard and somewhere else to be clicked through photos, and said, after depreciation and the deductible, maybe $90,000 for 40 years. When he left, I stepped onto the blackened lot. The ground still radiated warmth. The air tasted like melted plastic and grief. I nudged aside a charred beam with my shoe and saw a warped silver frame, our first Christmas photo. Robert's face was eaten away. My smile remained, ghostly beneath cracked glass. I slid it into my purse. That was what I had left. A burned photograph, a melted phone, and the clothes on my back. Silence settled. Even the birds kept their distance from the ruin. A truth stood up inside me. I had nowhere to go. No siblings. My parents long gone. Only one person remained who might say, "Yes, my son." Ethan lived about 40 miles away in Raleigh. We hadn't been close since Robert died. Too many missed calls and holiday meals that felt like appointments. Still, he was my son. Blood is supposed to mean something when the house is gone. I borrowed Mrs. Jenkins's phone and dialed. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound different." "There was a fire," I whispered. "The house is gone, Ethan. Everything's gone." Silence spread thin and long, so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. Then, carefully, "Were you hurt?" "No, just rattled." Okay, come here, we'll work something out." Relief rushed through me so fast I had to sit down. He would help. He was still my boy. I borrowed a small suitcase, and the drive to Raleigh felt endless. Mile after mile unwound the distance between who I had been and who I was now. A woman with a purse and a photograph, heading toward the promise of a door that would open. The cab turned into Ethan's neighborhood, immaculate and almost theatrical, lawns manicured to the inch, mailboxes all matching, air that smelled faintly of new paint and money. His house stood at the curve of the street, 2 stories, white shutters, a red door, brass numbers polished to a shine. It looked like certainty. I paid the driver, lifted my suitcase, and climbed the steps. Home, I told myself. Maybe this can be home again. I raised my hand to knock, and the door opened before my knuckles landed. Ethan stood there handsome, in a careful, practiced way success often demands. His smile hovered, polite and strained. Something flickered behind his eyes, quick and unreadable. From upstairs, a woman's voice floated down, smooth, bright, controlled. "Is that your mother, Ethan?" He stepped back. "Come in, Mom," he said, soft, careful. I crossed the threshold and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. At the top of the staircase, she appeared, young, immaculate, white jeans, a glass of wine held like a prop. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said. "We've been expecting you." The first thing I noticed about Ethan's house was that it didn't smell like home. It smelled like lemon polish and new paint, like a catalog. Everything gleamed: the marble floor, the mirrored hallway, the air itself. Even the silence seemed expensive. Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway, as if he'd invited a stranger inside. Behind him, the woman descended the stairs like she owned the sunlight pouring through the windows. "Mom," he said, "this is Lauren." I forced a smile. "It's nice to finally meet you." Lauren smiled back thinly, efficiently. "Grace, how awful about your house," she said, her tone polished like glass. "Ethan told me what happened." I clutched my small suitcase tighter. "Yes, it's still hard to believe." "You poor thing," she murmured, her eyes flicking down at my worn shoes, the soot that still clung to my sleeves. "Come in, please, make yourself comfortable." I stepped over the threshold, immediately aware that I didn't belong. My gray sweater and thrift store jeans looked like stains on her pristine white world. The living room could have been pulled from a magazine spread: white couches, glass tables, abstract art, and not a single sign that real people lived there. Even the throw pillows looked rehearsed. Ethan gestured to the sofa. "Sit down, Mom." I sat carefully, afraid I'd leave a mark. Lauren folded herself onto the matching armchair, crossing her legs smoothly. "Can I get you something? Water? Tea? Wine?" "Water's fine, thank you." My voice came out too soft, too polite. While she walked to the kitchen, Ethan sat across from me, not beside me. He looked older than I remembered, his hair trimmed short, his jaw set, his tie loosened but still hanging like a badge of order. "So," he began, clasping his hands, "how are you holding up?" I let out a small laugh that didn't sound like one. "How do you think?" He shifted, uncomfortable. "Right. I'm sorry, I just meant, have you talked to the insurance company?" "Yes, they're still processing the claim. It'll take weeks." Lauren returned with a bottle of sparkling water and a single glass, just one. She set it down on the coffee table in front of me, twisting off the cap. "This is all very sudden, I'm sure," she said sweetly. "But you're safe now." Safe. The word tasted hollow. I nodded. "I'm grateful to be here. Just until I figure out what comes next." Their eyes met across the room. It wasn't a glance, it was a conversation without words. I'd seen that look before, between couples planning a unified front. Ethan cleared his throat. "Of course, we'll help you get back on your feet. That's all I need," I said quickly. "A roof for a little while. I can contribute. Clean, cook." Lauren smiled again, the corners of her mouth tight. "That's thoughtful, but really, Grace, you don't have to worry about that. We already have a routine here. It's structured." "Structured?" I repeated. She gave a light laugh. "Ethan and I both work long hours. We keep our evenings quiet. It's how we recharge. Privacy is very important to us." Something inside me cooled. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Ethan leaned forward. "Mom, maybe we should just talk openly. This house, it's our space. We both work a lot, and Lauren needs calm to focus. I was thinking maybe you could stay at one of those extended stay places for a bit. I'd help cover the cost." I stared at him, not sure I'd heard right. You're suggesting I go to a hotel? Just for a few weeks, he said quickly, until the insurance money comes through. It's not about not wanting you here, it's just logistics. Lauren nodded sympathetically. And you'd have your own kitchen, your own privacy. It might actually be more comfortable for you. Comfortable. That word again, like a bandage placed over a wound they didn't want to look at. I lost everything yesterday, I whispered. Everything. And you think a hotel will make me comfortable? Ethan sighed. Mom, please don't make this emotional. Don't make this emotional? My voice cracked, rising despite myself. I watched my home burn down. Where am I supposed to put my emotions? Ethan in the suitcase with my toothbrush. He winced, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm just trying to make this easier for everyone. Lauren stood. Grace, she said softly, we both know living together can be hard. Boundaries protect relationships. You raised Ethan to be independent. We just want to keep things healthy. Healthy. The language of therapy and detachment. I looked from her to my son, the boy I'd carried through every fever, the man whose college bills I'd paid with double shifts. He sat silent, watching me drown in politeness. My chest ached. I'm not a burden, I said. No one said that, Lauren replied, which meant she had. Ethan's eyes darted toward her. Let's not argue. But we already were. I stood, my knees stiff. You know, I said, forcing my voice steady, your father and I built that house together. Every nail, every wall. When he died, I promised him I'd keep it standing. Yesterday, I broke that promise. I didn't think I'd lose you too. Mom? It's fine, I cut in. You're busy. You have your boundaries. I turned toward the door, my fingers trembling around the handle of my suitcase. Lauren's voice followed me, polite to the end. If you change your mind, there's a nice place near the mall. It has great reviews. I didn't answer. I stepped into the cold air, the door clicking shut behind me with the same sound the roof had made before it collapsed. The hotel clerk didn't look up when I slid my driver's license across the counter. Weekly rate or nightly? Weekly, I said. My voice sounded mechanical, detached from my body. The motel room smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke, though the sign outside claimed non-smoking. The carpet was thin, the bedspread patterned with tired flowers. I set my suitcase on the chair and sat down heavily. The quiet was unbearable. For 3 nights, I stayed there. I didn't sleep much. I watched the TV without hearing it. I washed my few clothes in the sink and hung them on the back of the door. Each morning, I called Ethan. Each time, he didn't answer. On the 3rd morning, he texted, "Hope you're settling in okay. I'll send some money soon." Settling in. The words made me laugh out loud, a bitter, cracked sound. On the night of the 3rd day, I woke to shouting in the hallway, some argument between a couple next door, the kind of shouting that ends with something breaking. I sat on the bed clutching my purse like armor. That's when I noticed the corner of a card poking out of the inside pocket, a small, yellowed rectangle worn soft by time. Jack Galloway. Galloway Construction, Chapel Hill. I had forgotten I still carried it. I traced the faded ink with my thumb. 40 years ago, I'd slipped that card into my wallet on the night Jack told me he'd come back for me. He never did. I'd kept it anyway, through marriage, motherhood, widowhood, a relic of a girl who once believed in promises. Now, sitting in a motel that smelled like despair, I felt that girl stirring again. I laughed, shaking my head. You're ridiculous, I told myself. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life's fallen apart. But the idea refused to leave. By morning, I was still staring at the card. The phone on the nightstand looked ancient, the kind that still needed you to press hard to dial. My hands shook as I picked it up. I hesitated with my finger over the last digit. What would I even say? Hello, Jack. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Need a miracle. Ridiculous, and yet. I pressed the number. It rang once. Twice. Galloway Development, a voice said, smooth, professional, unmistakably his. My mouth went dry. I almost hung up. But something, maybe desperation, maybe destiny, made me stay. Jack, I managed. It's Grace. Grace Mitchell. There was a pause long enough for me to think the line had dropped. Then, softly, almost disbelieving, Grace? It's been a long time, I said quickly. I shouldn't be calling. I didn't know who else to. Where are you? he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharper, alive with concern. "I'm in Raleigh. At a motel. My house burned down last week. I lost everything. My son..." My voice cracked. "He doesn't want me there." Another silence, heavier this time. Then, "Give me the address." "Jack, no. I didn't call to." "Grace," he said, calm and commanding, the same way he used to sound when he meant something. "Tell me where you are. I'm on my way." The line went dead before I could argue. I sat there for a long time, the dial tone humming like a heartbeat. Was I really that desperate? Was he really coming? I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser gray hair, tired eyes, the smoke still etched into my skin. Whatever he remembered of me, it wasn't this woman. An hour passed. Maybe more. Then headlights cut across the thin motel curtains. My heart jumped. I pulled them back and saw it, a silver Mercedes pulling into the cracked parking lot, its paint gleaming against the broken neon sign that buzzed "Rest Stop Inn." The engine went quiet. The driver's door opened. Even from a distance, I recognized him. His hair was gray now, his shoulders broader, but it was him, Jack Galloway, stepping out of the car like he'd just walked out of my memory. He looked up, and though the glass between us was tinted with decades, his eyes found mine. My hands trembled. After 40 years, he had really come. When I opened the door of that shabby motel room, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. The morning light fell across the cracked parking lot, and there he was, Jack Galloway, standing beside a silver Mercedes like time itself had stopped for him. 40 years had passed since I last saw him, and yet, in some strange, cruel way, nothing had changed. His hair was gray now, streaked with silver at the temples. He wore a dark wool coat, a navy scarf, and that same quiet confidence I remembered from when I was 25, the kind of confidence that made the world seem smaller when he looked at you. He smiled, and I felt something in my chest unlock. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. For a moment, I was 25 again, standing on that overlook in Chapel Hill, the night he promised he'd come back. But 40 years had gone by, and promises made in youth usually dissolve long before the hair turns gray. "Jack," I breathed, "you actually came." "I said I would," he replied simply. We stood there for a moment in the winter air, surrounded by the hum of traffic and the neon flicker of the Rest Stop Inn sign. It felt absurd me, barefoot in an old sweater, holding a half-packed suitcase. Him, polished and unreal, like a ghost who'd remembered how to live. Finally, he reached for the handle of my suitcase. "Let me," he said. I hesitated. "You don't have to. I want to." His voice carried that same certainty I used to love and resent, in equal measure. I let him take it. He set the suitcase in the trunk of the car as if it were something fragile. When he opened the passenger door for me, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished metal-tired eyes, lined face, hair streaked with ash and grief. The woman staring back looked nothing like the one he'd known. "Jack," I said quietly, "you should know I'm not who I used to be." He met my gaze, calm and steady. "Neither am I, but that doesn't change who you are to me." And just like that, I found myself inside his car, moving away from the motel and the wreckage of my life. The ride was mostly silent. The hum of the tires against the highway filled the spaces words couldn't. Occasionally, he glanced at me, not in pity, but in recognition, like he was remembering every version of me he'd ever known. I wanted to ask him everything, how his life had turned out, whether he'd married, whether he'd ever forgotten me. But the question stuck in my throat, heavy with all the years between us. Instead, I asked the simplest one, "Where are we going?" "Home," he said. The word felt dangerous, like touching a match to dry grass. We drove past the edge of Raleigh, past manicured suburbs and open fields, into a stretch of countryside that looked untouched by time. The houses grew farther apart, larger, older. Finally, Jack turned down a long driveway, lined with oak trees, whose bare branches reached toward the sky like hands. At the end of the drive stood a house that didn't look real, not flashy, not modern, but quietly magnificent. Stone walls, dark wood beams, wide windows that reflected the gray sky. It looked like it had been built to last forever. "This is where you live?" I asked, awe slipping into my voice. He nodded, cutting the engine. "Built it myself. Well, my company did, but this one I designed. You always said you wanted to build something that mattered. He smiled faintly. I did. When I stepped out of the car, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. There was something grounding about it, as if the land itself refused to let grief linger. Jack carried my suitcase up the steps and unlocked the door. The house opened into a wide foyer with warm light spilling from the chandeliers. Hardwood floors gleamed under Persian rugs, and the faint sound of a piano came from another room. It's beautiful, I whispered. It's too big, he said, always has been. He led me to a sitting room with tall windows that looked out over the hills. Sit, you must be starving. I hadn't eaten since the day before, but hunger had been replaced by nerves. I don't want to trouble you. He stopped me with a look. Grace, you could never be trouble. He disappeared into the kitchen, and within minutes, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air. When he returned, he carried 2 plates. Eat, he said, setting one before me. The first bite made me realize how long it had been since I'd eaten something warm that wasn't wrapped in plastic. He watched me quietly, not judging, not pitying, just watching. When I finally looked up, he said, "Tell me what happened." And I did. I told him about the fire, the way it started in the walls like a whisper before it roared into a scream. I told him about the photo of Robert, half burned, and about Ethan, my son, who'd turned me away at his perfect front door. My voice cracked when I said his name, and Jack didn't interrupt. He simply sat there, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. When I finished, the silence between us was so deep it almost hummed. "Your son," he said slowly. "He turned you away?" I nodded. His expression darkened, quiet fury flickering in his eyes. "Then he doesn't deserve you." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's all I have left, Jack." He shook his head. "No, Grace, you have you. And now, you have me." The words hung in the air, bold, simple, impossible. I looked at him across the table, at the lines etched into his face, the years written there. He looked older, but his eyes, those amber eyes, hadn't changed. "Why did you never come back?" I asked finally. He sighed, leaning back. "Because I thought you were happy. When I found out you'd married, I told myself that was how it was meant to be. I threw myself into work, into building things. I kept telling myself it was enough. It never was. 40 years is a long time," I said softly. He smiled sadly. "And yet here we are." I didn't know how to respond, so I looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, slow and delicate. Jack followed my gaze. "Stay here," he said quietly, "at least until you decide what's next." I hesitated. "Jack, I can't. This is your home." "And it's too empty," he interrupted. "You'd be doing me a favor." The tone left no room for argument. I wanted to protest, to tell him this was foolish, that I was just a woman broken by life clinging to a man from the past. But instead, I nodded. "All right," I said softly. He smiled, not triumphant, just relieved. "Good." Then it settled. That night, I lay in a guest room that was larger than my entire old house. The bed was soft, the sheets crisp, the fireplace crackling in the corner. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind replayed everything: the fire, Ethan's face, Lauren's cold smile, and now Jack. It felt like fate had picked me up from the ashes and set me down in a dream that wasn't mine. At one point, I got up and wandered the house, barefoot. The walls were lined with photographs: Jack, shaking hands with governors, cutting ribbons at construction sites, standing in front of skyscrapers that bore his company's name. But not a single picture showed him with a woman. Not one. I stopped at a photo near the fireplace: Jack standing on an unfinished balcony, sunlight catching his hair. In the background, half-built steel beams stretched toward the sky. He looked proud, yes, but lonely. "You should be asleep," he said from behind me. I jumped slightly, turning to see him standing in the doorway. He'd changed into a sweater and looked almost casual, almost human. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too quiet?" "Too surreal." He smiled faintly. "You'll get used to it." I looked at the photo again. "You really built an empire." He shrugged. "It gave me something to do with the years you didn't want." "Jack, I'm not blaming you," he said quickly. "You chose the life you needed. I chose to wait for something that might never come." Something in his voice cracked on that last word. We stood there for a long moment. The air between us felt charged, heavy with the things neither of us had said when we were young. Finally, I whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the silver in his beard, the faint scar on his jaw I'd never noticed before. "Your Grace," he said simply, "and that's enough." The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain against the windows. For a moment, I forgot everything: the fire, the motel, the rejection. It felt like being reborn inside someone else's life. Jack was in the kitchen, reading the newspaper. "Good morning," he said. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough." "Good." He poured me a cup of coffee before I could ask. "I have meetings later today, but you'll be fine here. The housekeeper comes in at 10. Feel free to explore. You're home now." The words settled into me like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd lost. After he left, I wandered through the house again, slower this time. In the study, I found a large desk covered with blueprints and architectural sketches. I recognized the name on one of the plans: Galloway Redevelopment Project, Charlotte Downtown. But there was another folder tucked under it, partially hidden: Galloway Estates Future Holdings. Inside were photographs of several properties, all with the same notation in the corner: acquisition pending. And one of them, my stomach turned, was the lot where my old house had burned down. The moment I slid the folder shut, my heartbeat sounded louder than the rain against the windows. I could still feel the glossy paper between my fingers, the weight of that word stamped across it: redevelopment. My house, my ashes, reduced to a project file. I turned just as Jack appeared in the doorway, his hand resting casually on the frame. "You're up early," he said, smiling. I couldn't sleep. I forced the folder back under the pile of blueprints with what I hoped looked like ease. "Just exploring." He glanced around the study. "Careful in here. Some of those plans are confidential." "Of course." My voice sounded steady, but inside, my thoughts were spinning fast. Confidential. I looked at him differently now, not as the man who'd shown up at a motel to rescue me, but as a businessman with interests, motives, and deals I knew nothing about. Jack walked over and kissed my cheek lightly, the gesture simple, almost domestic. "Coffee?" I nodded and followed him into the kitchen. The house felt too quiet. Every sound echoed: the clink of his spoon against the mug, the shuffle of his shoes against the tile. "Storm's supposed to clear by noon," he said, stirring cream into his coffee. "You should come with me to the site this afternoon. It might take your mind off things." "The site?" "The new development in Charlotte. Mixed-use complex offices, condos, shopping." He smiled, unaware of the tension crawling up my spine. "I'd like to show you what we're building. It's one of my proudest projects." I stared down into my cup. "Charlotte," I repeated quietly. "You've built there before?" "Plenty of times. It's one of our biggest regions." The folder flashed in my mind again: Charlotte, 1036 Pine Grove Road. My address, my home. "Maybe," I said after a moment. "We'll see." Later that morning, I stood at the tall windows in the living room, watching the clouds thin into pale sunlight. The storm was passing, but my mind wasn't calm. When Jack left for a meeting, I waited until I heard the car pull away before going back to the study. The folder was still there. I pulled it out, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. Site photos, maps, architectural renderings of sleek modern buildings. And there on the final page, my neighborhood drawn in black ink, crisscrossed with red lines marking demolition area. I traced the red square that marked where my home had stood. A note was scribbled beside it in Jack's handwriting: "Mitchell property, pending insurance settlement." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Pending insurance settlement. So he knew. He knew before I even called him that the land would be available soon. My stomach turned cold. Had he known about the fire? No, that was impossible. It had been an accident. It had to be. Still, the thought burrowed deep. I closed the folder, but the question stayed open. What if my rescue hadn't been chance? What if he hadn't come for me but for it? The housekeeper, Maria, arrived at 10, as Jack had mentioned. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Senora Grace," she greeted warmly, dusting her hands on her apron. "You are staying here now, yes?" "For a while," I said, "just until I find somewhere else." She smiled knowingly. "Mr. Galloway does not let people leave easily. You must be special." I wasn't sure how to answer that. "He's been kind." Maria laughed softly. "Kind? Maybe, but busy, always busy. Sometimes too busy to see what's in front of him." She moved through the room, dusting the shelves. As she reached for a photo frame, I caught a glimpse of a small scar on her wrist, a burn mark, old but unmistakable. "You've worked for him long?" I asked. "Since before this house was built," she said. "He trusts me. Maybe more than he should." She paused, lowering her voice. "You should be careful with him, Signora. He means well, but his business, not always clean." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Maria hesitated, glancing toward the doorway. "He makes deals, big ones, with people who do not care about others' lives. Money builds high walls, but it also buries things." "Buries things?" I repeated. She nodded once, quickly. "Sometimes the ground he builds on is not empty." Before I could ask more, the sound of tires crunching on the driveway made her straighten. "He's back early," she whispered. "Be careful what you ask." Jack's footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Grace?" I stepped out of the study, forcing a smile. "You're home already. Meeting ended early." He brushed rain off his shoulders. "Thought I'd take you to lunch before we head to the site." "I'd like that," I said, pretending calm. He smiled, reaching for my hand. "Good, you look better today." "Better?" I wondered if he could feel how hard I was trying not to shake. We drove into town, the conversation light but shallow talk of weather, new construction, the traffic on I-85. I answered politely, nodding when he smiled, laughing when he joked, all while my mind replayed Maria's warning. When we reached a small restaurant overlooking a lake, he led me to a corner table. The waiter greeted him by name. "Everyone seems to know you," I said once we sat down. "Occupational hazard," he replied easily. "You build half the town, people tend to remember." The waiter poured wine. I pushed my glass aside. "Jack," I said carefully, "what are you building in Charlotte?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've been doing your homework." "Just curious. You said it was one of your biggest projects." He nodded, leaning back. "It is. A full redevelopment zone, mixed use, sustainable design, revitalization for underused land. The kind of project that changes a city." "Revitalization," I repeated. "Isn't that just another word for erasing what was there before?" He frowned slightly. "Grace, I don't destroy things, I rebuild them." I met his gaze. "Even when people still live there." Something flickered in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "You've been reading my files." My heart stuttered. "What?" He smiled faintly. "You think I don't know when someone's been in my study?" I froze. He reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "It's okay, I would have looked too." My pulse hammered. "So you know I saw the plans?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. And before you start imagining things, no, Grace, I didn't plan your fire. I didn't even know that property was yours until after it happened." "Then why is it marked in your file?" He sigged, his expression hardening. "Because that neighborhood's been under review for redevelopment for years. Half the houses were condemned already. When I saw the news about your fire, I recognized the address. That's all." "That's all?" My voice cracked. "Jack, that was my home." He withdrew his hand, leaning back. "And I'm sorry for that, truly. But I'm a developer, Grace. I can't erase an entire project because of one tragedy." The words cut sharper than I expected. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who'd saved me, but as the man who built a kingdom on the ruins of other people's lives. The drive back to the house was silent. When we arrived, I went straight upstairs, claiming a headache. I sat by the window in the guest room, staring out over the hills as the light faded. I didn't know what to believe. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe the timing was coincidence, but the unease wouldn't leave. At dusk, I saw movement outside, a figure walking along the side of the property. It was Maria. She glanced up toward my window, then motioned discreetly for me to come down. I slipped on my shoes and hurried outside through the back door. She stood by the garden, her coat pulled tight against the cold. "You found the file," she said without preamble. "Yes." "Then you understand," she whispered. "He hides it behind business words: redevelopment, progress. But sometimes those projects start fires that are not accidents." My breath caught. "You think?" "I think too many things burn when they stand in his way." I stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind him of who he was before the money, and because people who remind him of that, they don't always stay long." The wind picked up, carrying her words into the dark. That night, I lay awake listening to the creak of the old house. Every sound made me flinch. Footsteps in the hallway, the hum of the heating system, the rustle of trees against the windows. At one point, I got up and checked the door. It wasn't locked. I turned the handle quietly and stepped into the hall. Jack's study door was closed, but light leaked from underneath. I crept closer, heart pounding. Through the narrow gap between the door and the frame, I saw him standing at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. "No," he was saying, his tone clipped. "Insurance hasn't cleared yet. We'll move once the claim closes. Yes, I'm aware who owns it." I said, "I'll handle her." Handle her. I felt my blood turn to ice. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, motionless. Then he reached into his drawer, pulled out a small silver lighter, and flicked it once, the flame catching the edge of his expression, cold and beautiful. I backed away before he could see me, my breath trapped in my throat. Back in my room, I shut the door and locked it, my fingers shaking. I sat on the bed until dawn, the lighter's flame burned into my mind like a prophecy. The smell was faint at first, a ghost of something sharp, chemical, and familiar. I stood in Jack's kitchen, staring at the note he'd left on the counter. "Please don't go anywhere." I lifted the paper, holding it between my fingers. The faintest smear of ash clung to the corner. It wasn't my imagination. Smoke. Again. It had been a week since I'd stood on the ashes of my house, but in that moment, every memory came rushing back: the roar, the heat, the sound of wood cracking under its own weight. My chest tightened. I walked slowly to the back door, half expecting to see flames rising from the trees. But there was nothing. Just gray sky, the stillness of the forest, and the heavy quiet of a house that was too large for its own secrets. I turned back inside, my pulse still racing. The smell lingered. It came from somewhere deeper, not the kitchen, not the fireplace. I followed it down the hall. The air grew warmer as I approached Jack's study. The door was closed, but light flickered beneath it, soft, rhythmic, like the pulse of a dying ember. I hesitated. He was supposed to be in Charlotte. "Jack?" My voice trembled as I pushed the door open. The room was empty. A candle burned on the desk, wax spilling down the glass in lazy rivers. The flame danced just inches away from a neat stack of folders, company documents, maps, architectural plans. All paper. All flammable. I blew it out, my heart hammering. The smell of smoke thickened for a moment, then vanished. What was he doing leaving an open flame near his files? I leaned closer. On top of the pile was another folder, different from the others, unmarked, sealed with a red band. My name was written on it. Grace Mitchell. A cold shiver ran down my back. I looked toward the door, half expecting Jack to appear. He didn't. I slipped the band off. Inside were printed pages, emails, scanned documents, copies of insurance statements, and photos of my burned house. Each image was stamped "Property of Galloway Development." My breath caught. One of the papers showed a timeline, my address, the fire date, the phrase "total loss confirmed," and next to it, handwritten, "acquisition finalized upon claimant relocation." Relocation. That was me. I dropped into the chair, my legs weak. The next page was an email between two names I didn't recognize. From M. Hopkins at Galloway Group. Com. To. E. Galloway at Galloway Group. Tom. Subject: Insurance Claim Pine Grove Project. Once the owner vacates the property, we'll finalize the insurance settlement and move forward. The fire expedited things, though the timing is sensitive. Should we proceed with demolition prep? Jack's reply: yes. Handle it quietly. My hands began to shake. Quietly. The word echoed like a gunshot. He had known. Maybe he hadn't started the fire, but he'd used it, profited from it, and now, I realized, he'd taken me in to keep me from asking questions. I closed the folder, breathing hard. From somewhere outside, a car engine started. I froze. Through the window, I saw headlights cutting through the trees. He was back. I shoved the folder under my arm, turned off the desk lamp, and slipped out through the side hallway. The air outside bit at my skin as I hurried through the garden toward the guest house at the back of the property. Maria had mentioned once that she kept cleaning supplies there. Maybe it had a phone. The gravel crunched under my shoes. Behind me, I heard the crunch of another pair of footsteps. "Grace?" Jack's voice, calm and almost amused, carried across the yard. "Where are you going?" I froze. He appeared at the edge of the driveway, still wearing his charcoal suit from earlier, the mist beating on his coat. He looked exactly as he always did, composed, gentle, in control. Except for his eyes. His eyes were colder now. "Jack," I said, forcing a smile. "You're back early." I finished sooner than expected. He took a few steps closer. "You look upset. Did something happen?" My mind raced. "Just a headache. I was going for some air." "In this weather?" He stopped a few feet away, close enough for me to smell his cologne, sharp, expensive, and suffocating. "I'm fine," I said, "just needed space." He studied me for a long moment, and for a heartbeat, I thought he knew, that he could see the folder pressed under my coat. Then he smiled, the same disarming smile that had once felt like sunlight. "Come back inside," he said, "you'll catch a cold." He hesitated. His smile didn't fade, but his tone hardened. "Now, Grace." I followed him back to the house. The warmth inside hit me like a trap closing. He poured wine at the counter, 2 glasses. "You've been quiet lately," he said, handing me one. "Is something wrong?" I held the glass but didn't drink. "I've been thinking," I said slowly, "about the redevelopment project." He raised an eyebrow. "Still on that?" "It just seems close to home, literally." He chuckled softly. "Grace, I told you it's business. Don't make it personal." "I can't help it," I said. "It is personal." He studied me again, the way a chess player studies the board before his next move. "You've changed," he said finally. "You used to trust people. I used to know when I could." Something flickered in his eyes, not anger but recognition. "You think I used you," he said quietly, "that this was all part of some plan." I didn't answer. "Grace," he said, setting his glass down, "you think too small. You think in terms of homes and heartbreak. I think in cities, futures, built on ashes," I whispered. He didn't deny it. We stood there in silence, the distance between us heavy with everything I didn't say. Finally, he exhaled. "If you can't see what I'm trying to do, maybe you shouldn't be here." I flinched. "Are you telling me to leave?" "No," he said slowly. "Not yet." He turned away, his voice lower now. "But don't go through my things again." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me in the glow of the kitchen lights, my wine untouched. That night, I called Ethan. He didn't pick up. The voicemail tone beeped, and I whispered, "Ethan, it's me. I need to talk to you. It's about Jack Galloway. He's not who you think he is. Please call me back." I hung up, my throat tight. I checked the time. 10:42 p.m. I decided to wait until morning. Then I'd leave. But sometime after midnight, a sound woke me, footsteps on the stairs. Slow, careful. I sat up, my heart racing. The floorboards creaked closer to my room. I slipped quietly out of bed and moved toward the dresser. The only weapon within reach was a heavy brass lamp. The door handle turned. Light spilled through the crack. "Grace?" It was Maria's voice. I exhaled shakily and opened the door. She slipped inside, her face pale. "You must go, tonight." "What?" "He knows you saw the folder," she whispered. "He was on the phone after you went to bed. He said she knows too much." My blood ran cold. "Maria, how do you—" "I listen," she said. "He thinks no one hears, but the walls in this house remember everything." I grabbed my suitcase, my hands trembling. "I'll leave now." She nodded. "There's an old road behind the greenhouse. Follow it until you reach the gate. I'll distract him if he wakes." "Maria, go," she said firmly, "before he decides how to handle you." The night outside was sharp and silent. The gravel bit into my shoes as I hurried toward the trees. The folder pressed against my chest felt like a heartbeat. The greenhouse loomed ahead, glass panes fogged from the rain, its door slightly ajar. I ducked inside to catch my breath. Rows of orchids lined the benches, their white petals glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was beautiful and eerie, the kind of beauty that hides rot underneath. A sound made me freeze. Footsteps. They weren't Maria's. Too heavy. "Grace," Jack's voice called softly, almost tender. "You shouldn't be out here." He was behind me before I could run. His hand caught my arm, firm but not cruel. "You were going to leave?" I struggled to breathe. "I have to." He tilted his head, studying me. "You really think I'd hurt you?" "I think I don't know you." He sighed, looking down. "You found the emails, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He released my arm and stepped back, his tone suddenly weary. You have no idea how much I tried to protect you. That neighborhood was doomed long before the fire. If I didn't buy it, someone worse would have. Protect me? I said. By erasing my life? He looked genuinely pained. I didn't know it was yours until after. I swear it. When I realized, He stopped, his jaw tightening. It doesn't matter. What's done is done. I backed toward the door. Then let me go. Grace. Please, Jack. His face softened. I would never hurt you, but you have to understand. There are people involved in this project who would. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the sound of an engine cut through the night loud, close, and coming fast. Headlights flared through the greenhouse glass. Jack's expression shifted instantly from weary to alarmed. Get down, he shouted. Glass shattered as a bullet tore through the pane behind me. I dropped to the floor as another shot cracked through the air. Jack grabbed my hand, pulling me behind one of the concrete benches. Stay down, he barked, his voice sharp with command. The engine roared again, tires squealing, then silence. I could smell gunpowder mixing with the orchids. When I dared to look up, Jack was standing, scanning the darkness outside. His shoulders were tense, his breath heavy. Who was that? I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, someone who doesn't want either of us alive. The wind cut across the greenhouse like a blade, whipping the broken glass into tiny flashes of moonlight. Jack's last words still rang in my ears. The fire wasn't an accident, and it didn't start with your house. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The night air smelled of smoke again, not real this time, but memory, the kind that seeps into your skin and never washes off. What do you mean it didn't start with my house? I whispered. Jack's expression hardened, eyes scanning the dark edges of the property. This isn't the first fire, Grace. It's just the one that got out of control. I stared at him, trying to make sense of it. Are you saying someone's been setting them on purpose? Yes, he said. And whoever just shot at us? They're connected to it. The pieces didn't fit, but the edges were sharp enough to cut. Why would anyone do that? He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Because fire erases history. It makes land cheap, clears people out fast, and leaves room for someone like me to rebuild. But you said, I said I didn't start yours, he interrupted. And I didn't, but I know who did. He glanced toward the driveway, where the sound of the engine had faded into silence. We can't stay here. Whoever they are, they'll come back. I followed him out of the greenhouse, glass crunching under our feet. My pulse still thundered from the gunshots. Jack, I said, grabbing his sleeve, you need to tell me everything, right now. He stopped, turning toward me. For the first time since I'd met him again, he looked older not just in years, but in weight, like the truth had been living inside him for decades. Fine, he said, but not here. We crossed the yard toward his truck, parked near the old barn at the edge of the property. The headlights flicked on, casting long shadows across the gravel. Once inside, Jack locked the doors and turned on the heater. There's a company, Arcadian Development Partners. They've been acquiring land through my firm for years. We build, they finance. But lately, they've been expanding too fast, buying properties that were supposedly destroyed by accidents. Fires, floods, whatever cleared the title fast enough. I frowned. So they burn it, buy it cheap, rebuild and sell it for millions? He nodded grimly. It's called urban clearance, legal on paper, but some of the accidents weren't accidents. A few years ago, one of my smaller sites went up in flames a week before the deal closed. I asked questions, and they told me to stop. They said, the less you know, the longer you'll stay rich. And you stayed? I had investors, partners. You can't just walk away from billions of dollars overnight, so I played along. But when your address showed up on that file, he paused, his knuckles whitening around the steering wheel. That's when I realized how far they were willing to go. My chest tightened. You think they burned my house to push the sale? I think someone inside Arcadian saw your property as the last piece of land between two of their projects. Your fire just happened to make it available. Happened to, I repeated bitterly. I didn't know they'd target you, I swear. I wanted to believe him, but every time he said I didn't know, it sounded like a man confessing a smaller sin to hide a greater one. Who's behind it? I asked. He hesitated. The CEO's name is Malcolm Hayes, but he's not the one pulling the strings anymore. There's someone else, someone who doesn't like loose ends. And I'm a loose end. He didn't answer. The silence was confirmation enough. By dawn, we were on the highway heading west. The mountains rose in the distance, jagged and cold. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping against his knee in restless rhythm. "Where are we going?" I asked. "There's an old cabin near Boone," he said. "My grandfather's place. No one knows about it. We'll be safe there for a while." "Safe," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. The folder sat between us on the seat, the one with my name written on it. I had skimmed only part of it the night before, but even that had been enough to know how deep the rot went. Jack noticed me glancing at it. "You shouldn't have that," he said quietly. "Maybe not," I replied, "but if anything happens to me, someone has to know what's in it." His jaw tightened. "Grace, this isn't just about you anymore." "Then tell me what it is about," I shot back, "because every time I think I understand, it gets worse." He sighed. "Arcadian's next project isn't in Charlotte, it's nationwide. They're trying to control land use through shell companies, hospitals, nursing homes, even disaster relief funds. Your property was just one piece in a much bigger board game, and you were part of it." His grip on the wheel tightened, not willingly, but yes, my company's name gave them legitimacy. My reputation opened doors they couldn't. "And when you realized what they were doing—" "I tried to pull out," he said. "That's when things started catching fire." I turned toward the window, watching the trees blur past. "You think they'll come after us?" "I know they will," he said. "That's why we need to stay off the grid." We drove in silence for miles, the tension sitting between us like a third passenger. Around noon, we stopped at a gas station off an empty highway. I stepped out to stretch while Jack fueled the truck. Inside, the clerk, a kid barely 20, stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. "You're on the news," he said suddenly. I froze. "What?" He pointed at the small TV mounted near the counter. A local news anchor was speaking in her polished, tragic tone. "Authorities continue to investigate the fire that destroyed a home in Raleigh last week. Officials now suspect foul play. The primary homeowner, Grace Mitchell, was last seen leaving her son's residence days later. She is now considered a person of interest." The photo on the screen was my driver's license, my face frozen in bureaucratic lighting, the word "wanted" for questioning flashing beneath it. I backed away, my pulse spiking. "Turn it off," I whispered. The clerk hesitated. "Ma'am, Turn it off," I shouted. Jack appeared in the doorway, his expression dark. "Grace, let's go." I followed him out, the cold wind slapping against my face. "They think I did it?" He nodded grimly. "Arcadian's faster than I thought. They're framing me?" "Not just you," he said. "Me too. They're burning the evidence and the people." We reached the cabin by nightfall. It sat deep in the woods, half swallowed by fog, with a small stream running behind it. Inside, everything smelled of cedar and dust. Jack lit the fireplace while I paced the floor. "If they've put me on the news, how long before they find us?" He shrugged off his coat. "Not long, but they'll look for patterns, credit cards, phone pings." I ditched my devices. "Did you?" I hesitated. "My phone's in my bag." "Give it to me." He took it without another word and tossed it into the fire. The screen cracked, then melted. "Jack." He turned toward me, calm. "They can trace everything, Grace. You have to trust me." "Trust you?" I laughed bitterly. "You built the company that did this to me." "I built buildings," he snapped, "not monsters." The firelight carved deep lines across his face, making him look like a man carved out of guilt and ambition. After a long silence, I said, "You could have gone to the police." "They're already paid," he said flatly. "Malcolm Hayes owns half the county commissioners. This isn't a fight we can win by asking nicely." "Then what are we supposed to do?" He looked at the folder between us on the table. "We find someone they can't buy." "Who?" "There's a journalist," he said. "Rachel Carver. She's been digging into Arcadian for years. If we can get this file to her, she'll blow it open." "And where is she?" He looked out the window, where the forest pressed against the glass like a warning. "Washington, D.C. But we can't just drive there. Not with your face on every screen." "So what do we do now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something from his coat, a small metal flash drive. "Everything in that folder is backed up here. Names, payments, fire reports. It's enough to destroy Arcadian if we can survive long enough to deliver it." I took it from him, my fingers trembling. Then we can't stay here. He nodded. Tomorrow we move. The plan was simple. Leave before dawn, cut through back roads, and head north. But as night settled deeper, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin felt like footsteps. Every flicker of light felt like fire. Sometime after midnight, I got up to get water. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the table and the folder. I reached for it, meaning only to tuck it safely away. But something slipped out from between the pages, a photograph. It showed my house, or what was left of it taken from a high angle, like from a drone. The date stamp read the day before the fire, and there, standing at the edge of the photo, was a man in a dark coat. His back was turned, but even through the blur I recognized the stance, the shoulders, the silver hair. Jack. My throat tightened. The photo trembled in my hand. Behind me, the floorboards creaked. "Can't sleep?" His voice was soft, casual. I turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, half lit by the fire. "I was just looking for water," I said, slipping the photo behind my back. He smiled faintly. "You never did learn how to lie, Grace." I took a step back. "What were you doing there, Jack?" "At your house, before it burned." He didn't answer at first. The silence stretched long enough for fear to bloom like smoke in my chest. Then, softly, "Trying to save you." The world disappeared in an instant. When the lights went out, the cabin became a single pulse of breath and darkness. Outside, the wind dragged its nails across the roof. Inside, I could hear only my heartbeat, loud, frantic, alive. "Jack?" I whispered. "Stay low," he said. His voice came from somewhere near the table. "Don't move until I tell you." I crouched by the hearth, my hands gripping the edge of the cold stone. A faint orange glow bled from the dying fire, enough to shape his silhouette against the window. He moved with precision, not panic, not surprise, as if he'd lived through this before. "What's happening?" I asked. "They cut the power," he said, checking his watch. "That means they're close." "Who's they?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the drawer of the sideboard and pulled out something metallic. I heard the soft click of a magazine sliding into place. My stomach twisted. "You have a gun?" "3, he said simply, "and right now you'll be glad I do." Through the window, a light flashed, brief, deliberate, distant, then another. Jack turned toward me, his face half-shadowed. "We need to move. There's a service tunnel under the cabin that leads to the riverbank. It's old, but it'll get us out unseen." "You built a tunnel?" "My grandfather did. He used to smuggle whiskey during Prohibition. Guess we're about to thank him for his sins." He handed me a flashlight, the kind with a cracked handle and half-dead batteries. "Stay close," he said. The floorboards creaked as we moved toward the back room. My heart raced with every sound. Behind us, the faint crunch of gravel broke through the howling wind. Someone was outside. Jack paused, finger to his lips. The crunching stopped, then 3 slow knocks on the front door. I nearly screamed. Jack whispered, "They won't knock twice." He opened a hatch in the floor and motioned for me to climb down first. I hesitated only a second before sliding into the darkness below. The air in the tunnel was damp and cold, heavy with the scent of earth and mold. Jack followed, pulling the hatch shut above us. The flashlight beam danced across rough stone walls and narrow wooden beams. "How long does this go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "About a 1/4 mile," he said. "It'll open near the river." We moved quickly, our steps muffled by the packed dirt. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder with each step. Behind us, a muffled thud shook the ceiling, the sound of the front door giving way. They were inside. "Faster," Jack whispered. We reached a bend where the tunnel split in two, one passage narrow and low, the other wide enough to stand. Jack hesitated, his flashlight sweeping the walls. "This wasn't here before," he murmured. "What do you mean?" "My grandfather built 1 tunnel, not 2. He crouched to inspect the smaller passage. The dirt around its edges looked freshly disturbed. "Someone's been digging," he said quietly. Before I could reply, a sound echoed from the way we'd come, footsteps, heavy and sure, descending the tunnel. Jack grabbed my arm. "Run." We sprinted through the main passage, the flashlight bouncing wildly. The air turned icy, the darkness thicker. My lungs burned. Behind us, the footsteps quickened. A gunshot cracked, the sound deafening in the narrow space. Dirt rained from the ceiling. Keep going, Jack shouted. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wide chamber, an old storage cellar, judging by the rusted barrels stacked against the wall. A faint glow leaked from the cracks in the ceiling. The river's above us, Jack said, scanning the walls. There should be a hatch. He stopped mid-sentence, eyes fixed on the far corner. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly to life. Beneath it stood a man tall, dressed in black, his face obscured by shadow. Going somewhere? The man asked. His voice was low, calm, almost polite. Jack raised his gun. Step aside, Malcolm. The man laughed softly. You shouldn't use my name in front of witnesses. My stomach twisted. Malcolm Hayes, the CEO of Arcadian, the man who'd turned whole neighborhoods into ashes. He stepped forward into the light, revealing sharp cheekbones, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes like steel. Grace Mitchell, he said, smiling faintly, you've caused quite a stir. My throat went dry. You burned my home. He tilted his head. I didn't strike the match, but I did sign the paperwork. Does that count? Jack's voice was low, controlled. You're not leaving this room, Malcolm. Jack, Malcolm said almost fondly, you've always had a talent for melodrama. You could have been rich beyond measure, but instead, you fell for a woman and grew a conscience. Tragic, really. Drop the act, Jack said. This ends tonight. Malcolm smirked. You still don't understand, do you? You're not the hero here, you're the loose end. Before Jack could reply, 2 more men appeared in the doorway behind Malcolm, both armed, both expressionless. Jack fired first. The shot echoed, striking one of the men in the shoulder. The other raised his weapon, and the air filled with the sound of bullets and ricochets. Down, Jack yelled, pulling me behind one of the barrels. Wood splintered around us. The flashlight fell, rolling across the dirt. Jack fired again, then again. One of the men dropped. The other ducked behind a beam, reloading. Give her to me, Jack, Malcolm shouted over the gunfire. She's the only thing standing between us and silence. Jack turned to me, eyes blazing. Run when I say. Understand? Jack, no. Understand? I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. He waited for the next reload click, then stood, firing 3 quick shots. Go. I bolted toward the narrow passage on the left. Dirt clawed at my shoes as I crawled through, the sound of gunfire echoing behind me. The passage curved upward, tightening until I had to crawl on my hands and knees. My flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, I could still hear Jack shouting not words, just my name. Then a final shot. And silence. I froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. Jack, I whispered. No answer. I forced myself forward, fingers scraping the walls, until I reached a wooden hatch above me. I pushed, and it gave way, opening into the cold night. I climbed out into the open air, gasping. The river glimmered under the moonlight, the trees bending in the wind like witnesses. Behind me, the tunnel entrance was hidden by a mound of moss and stone. For a long time, I just stood there, waiting for Jack to emerge. He didn't. Finally, I knelt by the river, trying to breathe. The flash drive was still in my pocket, warm against my leg, proof of everything if I could live long enough to use it. A sound broke the stillness, the crunch of branches behind me. I turned, heart leaping. But it wasn't Jack. Maria stepped out from the trees, her coat torn, her face pale. You have to come with me, she whispered. Maria, how? There's no time. They're not all dead. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the woods. If he's still alive, he'll find you, but not if they do first. I stumbled after her, glancing back once more at the dark riverbank. For just a second, I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting near the tunnel mouth, the faintest flicker of orange light beneath the earth. Smoke rose, curling into the cold air. The forest burned behind us. The explosion rolled through the valley like thunder, swallowing the sound of everything else, the wind, the river, my heartbeat. It was as if the earth itself had exhaled 40 years of secrets in one violent breath. Maria and I hit the ground, the heat licking at our backs. For a few seconds, the night was fire and noise, nothing more. Then silence again, sharp and ringing, as if the world was waiting to see who survived. I opened my eyes. Embers rained from the trees, glowing like dying stars. Maria was beside me, coughing, her face streaked with soot. Get up, she rasped. We have to keep moving. But Jack, she grabbed my shoulders. Grace, look at me. If he made it out, he'll find us. If he didn't, we can't stay here." Her words sank like stones in my chest. I forced myself to stand, staring toward the plume of smoke rising over the trees. Somewhere beneath that burning ground lay the truth, and maybe the man who had lived half his life in lies. We stumbled through the woods, guided only by the thin silver line of the river. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. When dawn finally came, it was gray and cold. The forest gave way to an abandoned logging road, the kind no one used anymore, except for lost souls and ghosts. Maria stopped to catch her breath. "There's an old ranger station about 3 miles down," she said. "If we can reach it, there's a landline." "And then what?" She hesitated. "Then you call the one person who can make this count." "Rachel Carver," I said quietly. Maria nodded. We reached the ranger station just as the sun broke through the clouds, weak light over a skeleton of wood and rust. The place looked long deserted, windows cracked, roof sagging, door hanging by one hinge. Inside, the air smelled of dust and pine. A map of the Blue Ridge Mountains still clung to one wall, faded and yellowed. The landline sat on a desk, half buried under papers. I picked it up and nearly cried when I heard a dial tone. Maria handed me a folded slip of paper. "Rachel's number. I kept it in case something like this ever happened." "You worked for Arcadian," I said. "You were one of them." "I cleaned their houses," she said. "I heard their meetings. That makes me dangerous too." I dialed the number with shaking fingers. Each ring felt like a lifetime. Then a click. "This is Carver." Her voice was brisk, professional, slightly wary. "Miss Carver," I said, my throat tight. "My name is Grace Mitchell. You don't know me, but I have something you've been looking for." There was a pause. "Who gave you this number?" "Maria Lopez." "She said you're the only one who can expose Arcadian development." Silence again, then, quietly, "Where are you?" "In the mountains near Boone. I have files, proof of the fires, the bribes, everything." Her tone sharpened. "Do not go anywhere. I'm sending someone I trust." "Who?" "He'll identify himself as Connor. He's a photographer freelance, but clean. You'll know him when you see the red Jeep. Stay hidden until then. If anyone else finds you first, you're dead." The line went dead before I could answer. Maria looked at me. "Well?" "She's sending help," I said. "Help," Maria muttered, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "We'll see." 3 hours passed. Every sound outside made me flinch: the snap of a branch, the cry of a crow. I couldn't tell if the smoke on the horizon was still from the explosion or a new fire. Finally, a red Jeep appeared at the edge of the road. A man climbed out, mid-30s, lean, carrying a camera bag and a quiet wariness. "Grace Mitchell?" he called softly. Maria tensed, but I nodded. "Connor?" He gave a brief nod. "Rachel sent me. She's on her way to D.C. She wants the drive immediately." I reached into my pocket, but my hand froze. "Where's Jack?" Connor frowned. "Who?" "Jack Galloway," I said. "He worked with Arcadian. He was with me when the tunnel." I stopped, swallowing hard. Connor shook his head. "I didn't see anyone else in the reports. Just the explosion. They're saying it was a gas leak." I felt the words like a punch. A gas leak. That's how the world would bury him: neat, simple, convenient. Maria took the flash drive and handed it to him. "Get this to Rachel," she said. "If anything happens to us, she needs to release it." Connor pocketed it carefully. "You'll both be safe soon, I promise." But promises, I'd learned, were the most flammable things of all. By evening, we were on the move again, following Connor's Jeep through winding mountain roads. My thoughts tangled: the fire, the folder, Jack's last words. "Trying to save you." The sky turned red as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting everything in the color of loss. We stopped near a small diner off the highway. Connor went inside to make a call while Maria and I waited in the car. "He's too calm," Maria muttered. "No one that calm survives this long." "You think he's lying?" "I think everyone lies," she said, exhaling smoke. "Even the ones who swear they're saving you." I looked down at my hands, still smeared with dirt and ash, and wondered if she was right. When Connor returned, his expression was tense. "We need to keep moving. Rachel's been followed." "By who?" "Arcadian's private security. They've got her car on a tracker. She's going dark for 24 hours. We'll meet her at a secure location outside D.C. Maria leaned forward. "And until then?" He hesitated. "We find somewhere safe. I know a motel in Wytheville. It's off-grid." Another safe house, Maria muttered. They always end the same. Still, we followed. What else was there to do? The motel was small, just 6 rooms and a flickering neon sign that read Sleepy Pines. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. We took adjoining rooms. Maria insisted on staying up to keep watch. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jack, the firelight on his face, the sound of his voice saying my name. Around midnight, a knock came at the door. "Grace, it's me," Connor said softly. "I need to show you something." I opened the door. He held his phone up, a news alert on the screen. The headline read, "Galloway executive found dead in apparent explosion suspected of arson." Below it was a picture of Jack. I covered my mouth. "No, they're blaming him," Connor said. "The fire, the corruption, everything. They're tying it all to him." "That's impossible." My voice broke. "He wasn't." "I know," Connor said, "but this is how they work. They clean their mess with headlines." Maria appeared in the doorway behind me. "So it's done then, they win." "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." Connor looked at me. "Then you better decide how far you're willing to go." By morning the air had changed. I could feel it, that stillness before a storm. Connor went to fuel the Jeep. Maria sat by the window, her eyes on the road. "Grace," she said softly, "if something happens, don't trust anyone wearing a badge. They'll sell you faster than Arcadian burns a building. You sound like you've lived this before." She smiled sadly. "Because I have." A moment later, her smile faded. "Car," she whispered. I followed her gaze, a black SUV turning into the lot, windows tinted, moving slow. Connor was still at the pump. "Run," Maria said. "Not without you." She grabbed my arm. "I'll hold them off. You take his car and go." "Maria, now." She pushed me toward the door. I ran. Outside, the SUV doors opened. 2 men stepped out, dressed in suits that didn't belong in a motel parking lot. Maria drew her gun before they even spoke. "Back off," she shouted. One raised his hand, calm. "We're not here for you. We want the woman. You'll have to go through me." They did. The first shot cracked the morning wide open. I didn't look back. I reached Connor's Jeep, threw myself inside, and hit the gas. The rearview mirror filled with smoke and flashing lights as the motel shrank behind me. I drove until the mountains blurred and the sun burned high in the sky. It was late afternoon when I finally stopped a rest area just across the Virginia border. My hands were shaking too badly to keep driving. The flash drive, it wasn't in my pocket. My blood ran cold. I tore through the car, checking every compartment. Nothing. Then I remembered Maria had handed it to Connor. Connor. The realization hit like another explosion. He wasn't delivering it to Rachel, he was delivering it back to Arcadian. That's why he was calm, that's why he knew exactly where to find us. I sat there for a long time, the highway roaring beside me, trying to breathe through the panic. Finally, I pulled out the only thing left in my jacket, a small metal pendant Jack had given me years ago. I hadn't realized I'd kept it. When I opened it, a tiny memory card fell into my palm. I stared at it, then laughed, half disbelief, half relief. Jack hadn't trusted anyone, not even me. He'd made a copy, a backup of the backup. Maybe he really had been trying to save me.